So my name is Shannon McGrady, and I'm the Program and Research Coordinator here at the library, and my colleague Lauren, who you met at the door, is our Program and Research Librarian. I have the pleasure this evening of introducing and hosting Lieutenant Colonel Trevor Cadeau. Trevor is an aerospace engineer with 16 wing headquarters at CFB Borden, or Base Borden. I won't say too much about Trevor, as I know he will share a bit of his story, but I will say that I was told by a good friend of his that he was made for the military. Since joining, Trevor has excelled through the ranks and continued his education from a Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering to a Master's in Chemical and Materials Engineering to his most recent accomplishment, Master's of Defense Studies. Alongside his professional success and his passion for serving our country, Trevor is raising a beautiful family with his wife, Carla. When I first asked Trevor to speak this evening, he didn't hesitate. Educating civilians on the role of our Canadian Armed Forces, from their service to their struggles, is very important to him. Trevor, we are honored to have you this evening. Thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, first, thank you very much, Shannon, for inviting me here. What a distinct pleasure it is to come back to a building I actually spent some time in, in high school, studying and putting together history papers that I wasn't written so well. Hopefully my years have done a little bit for my proficiency in being able to speak and put together something that'll be of interest to all. So I'm going to start, as Shannon alluded to, with just a little bit of a background. Because I am back in my hometown, I went to St. Andrew's School here and attended the only high school at the time, Orangeville District Secondary School. And then I went on to join the military right after high school. My first posting was to 12 Wing Shearwater in Halifax, and then I returned to the military college to go back to school again, a sucker for punishment, I suppose. From there I was posted to the Aerospace Telecommunication and Engineering Support Squadron in Trenton, and spent 4 years there, utilizing what I had spent 2 years at the military college learning a great deal about, which was non-destructive testing. From there I went to Ottawa and worked with the Cyclone Procurement Project to replace the Sea King. So the Sea King is the wonderful helicopter you see on the top right corner of the screen there. A little bit of a story with that one that's painted in those colors. We worked really hard because I was fortunate enough to be working out west at 443 Maritime Helicopter Squadron when we were retiring the Sea King. And we managed to get one painted in the colors that it entered service in. And oddly enough, this was in the last few months of that aircraft's service, and it somewhat begrudgingly it was one of the only serviceable aircraft available, so got deployed in support of some efforts, and there were multiple photos taken of our venerable Sea King. I had an opportunity to be deployed on Operation Lentus, which was the support to the BC wildfires in 2017 in Kamloops, BC. And then I had the opportunity to return home, or close to home, in Borden, where I went and worked at the Canadian Forces School of Aerospace Technology and Engineering. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So I want to just discuss briefly why I decided to or like and enjoy the opportunity to brief on Remembrance Day. When I first spoke at a school midway through the campaign in Afghanistan, I was pretty hesitant to do so, and it was due to my career experience at the time, which really only went as far as ATAS. I didn't have any deployment experience of my own, and so I wondered, what could I share to an audience that would be of interest? When folks would say, "Thank you for your service," which was something that was becoming quite prominent at the time, deep down inside, I would always say politely, "Thank you," but I always had a tough time accepting or acknowledging that. I felt somewhat hypocritical or a little bit like an imposter. I was taking credit for the work of my friends, perhaps, that had been serving overseas. Since that first Remembrance Day presentation, really my deployment experience is the Operation Lentis, and it's a domestic deployment, which some folks would look upon as not real deployed experience. And that's okay, and I self-criticize here a little bit for the aim of my presentation. So if I don't have first-hand deployed experience to share, why do I continue to deliver Remembrance Day presentations? My recollection as a young person was being a little uncertain with what to think about during the moment of silence during Remembrance Day. I realized that I was fortunate enough to know and be close with a number of today's veterans. That provided a unique perspective, and despite wearing the uniform, I could share and emphasize what we should remember and be thankful for during Remembrance Day, without feeling as though I was asking Canadians to be grateful to me specifically. The aim of this evening's presentation will be to share with you some of the people I know and provide some thoughts and ideas for what you may choose to think about during the moment of silence on Remembrance Day. I need to keep track of my papers here. So we're going to start. This is the outline. We're going to touch on 4 different aspects to that concept. And the first one will be the members of the Canadian Armed Forces. I really like this picture because it contrasts what I grew up knowing as veterans, which are the fine young gentlemen in the front of our picture here. And it sort of shows the next generation in behind them. Mind you, it's cadets from the Royal Military College. It doesn't represent the entire cross-section of the military, but it's a very young aspect, the next generation, I suppose, of our military. And this is a picture from the Remembrance Day Parade in Ottawa. This picture here, or the collage of pictures here, is one of a message of diversity, something that we're hearing a lot about in the media today, and in various different professions, etc., striving to achieve this. And interestingly, you can see that a number of these pictures are either from back in history, or the folks that are in the pictures are perhaps they're not starting out their life, I suppose would be the way to say that, or starting out their career. The message here is that the military and serving the country has always been provided through diversity. But the CAF today, the Canadian Armed Forces today, apologies if I use acronyms, has acknowledged that if we can eliminate exclusionary policies where feasible, there is a benefit, not just to recruiting, but to our ability to conduct overseas military operations. So this next set of pictures are all friends of mine that I want to introduce you to. So in the left-hand corner is a friend of mine who served in the Armoured. His name is Ektadar. He's from Edmonton, and he was an armoured officer, so patrolled in military vehicles, commanded military vehicles. He's got a significant other in his life, and he's got a variety of interests, pastimes, getting out into the outdoors and enjoying things. He's since retired. He had some medical issues, and he's now working in Toronto to support one of the airlines, out of the Toronto Island Airport. On the top right-hand side is another good friend, Chris. He's from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. He's in the infantry, and you just have to have respect for the folks that are in the infantry. He has a wonderful family, and again, variety of interests. One of the things I really enjoy about Chris is he's quite a photographer, so he puts up all kinds of great images. The bottom left corner is a friend, Mark. He's from Ottawa originally, and he was in the Navy, served in the Navy for quite some time. He's since retired and become a public servant, so still supporting the military, working in Ottawa as a civilian. And you know, again, similar, lots of kind of interests like you and I might have. He's into mountain biking, the outdoors, really big, really into his supporting his family as well. And then finally, in the bottom right-hand corner is a friend of mine, Jake. He's from Bracebridge, Ontario. He's an aerospace engineer like myself. You know, again, has a family like many of us, and shares many interests. One of the things I remember a lot about Jake is his interest in basketball. Now, the point of introducing you these folks is, despite being very ordinary, they are highly trained and very dedicated individuals to what they do. To do what they do, each of them have had to make sacrifices, whether it's being away from their loved ones for 6 months to a year, missing the birth of a child, having their family, looking for a house, or preparing to relocate across the country on their own while they're serving overseas. Or perhaps it's just working in an unwelcome and hostile environment. Every one of them has had to make sacrifices of their own to support and to do what they do. So during Remembrance Day and in the moment of silence, perhaps you can think about life events that are really important to you and realize that many veterans have had to miss out on some of the biggest life events to fulfill their service to their country. So the next section, why do people join the Canadian Armed Forces? Well, this picture here was put in for a bit of comic relief, I suppose. I'm not sure about you, but when I look at this picture, it appears to me that this individual may be having a few second thoughts as to why he joined the military. So why people join? Well, in peacetime, it could be for a sense of adventure. It may be that it's a unique job type that they're looking for, such as a fighter pilot working in the artillery or in the armored or sailing the high seas in the Navy. It may be a pathway to something else. There was a number of folks that I went to school with who desperately wanted to be astronauts, and while they recognized that that was a very lofty goal, they also realized that there was a high proportion of the Canadian astronauts who happened to have flown fighter jets in the Canadian military. So they felt as though that was one of the best avenues in terms of pursuing their goal of being an astronaut. They may have family members who have served or who are serving. It may be a subsidized education that they're looking for, and the military is renowned for the education and the support it provides to its personnel. Maybe they wanted to see the country and the world, a desire to contribute to their country and uphold the values and ideals of that country. Maybe it's just simply having pride in their country and the opportunity to wear their flag on their shoulder. It may be secure employment, or it could be camaraderie. All this to say there's a variety of reasons why someone may join. Because we're talking about peacetime, I wanted to share just a brief story with you about 9/11. For myself and my friends that went through RMC at the time, we had only graduated about 4 or 5 months, and then September 11th happened. And, you know, suffice to say, while a lot of us recognized that, you know, joining the military, there was the potential to be asked to go over to do something in combat, etc., because of what we had grown up in, the Cold War was really, you know, in its ending stages, if not completely, had passed by. And there wasn't a lot of threats. So when we joined, we weren't necessarily anticipating or seeing an active threat to Canadians or to ourselves. And I can remember this distinctly. It was between our second and third year. It was in the summer, and we all decided to go into Montreal. We were doing our French language training, and we watched the movie Saving Private Ryan. And Saving Private Ryan, at least for myself, was one of the first movies I ever got to see that did just an incredible job of showing what it was like to be storming the beaches back in World War II. And the lesson for me when I watched that was, while you could be the best soldier you can possibly be, really getting to that beach and surviving on that day was really just a matter of chance. And that was a bit of an awakening as well, I suppose, in terms of understanding what war was really about. So I have a deep respect for those who have joined post 9/11, particularly those who decided to join while Afghanistan was underway, because they knew exactly what they were getting themselves into. Now, I'm going to move away from peacetime and just talk a little bit about wartime. Why do folks join in war? Well, maybe it's to safeguard freedoms, whether it's their own or their family, support what we hold dear. That could be a moral obligation that they have to feel to serve, or it might just have come down to conscription, where they were told, you will serve. Why those in the world wars? Why did those in the world wars join? I think it's important to use this sort of parallel a little bit. I think a lot of folks were concerned about their freedoms being taken away, the things that they wanted to do, to be told that you can't do those things. And interestingly, with COVID, I think all of us have a little bit better sense over the last couple of years what that can feel like. While COVID we've all had the hopes that a lot of the restrictions and things that have been imposed upon us that we can't do anymore, that's going to go away. But imagine putting yourself in a scenario where you don't know if that's ever going to change. You know, if your country is occupied, things may never go back to the way they were. Probably something that at least some folks would be willing to fight for. So during the moment of silence, you can think of all those who have joined and the various motivations that they may have led them to their career choices, and be thankful for their service. Okay, on to our third section. It's a little too trigger happy there with my paper, sorry about that. We're gonna discuss a little bit about these two veterans and give you some perspective from each of them. So this first veteran is Harvey Seaton, and I'm going to read something to you folks that sort of adds to what's below the pictures there. Private Seaton saw action during the Dieppe raid, August 19th, 1942. He landed at Blue Beach with C Company 14 Platoon, Royal Regiment of Canada. He was one of the few to successfully cross the fire-swept beach, take up a position and return fire from the seawall where so many from his regiment were killed or wounded. During the exchange of fire, he was wounded in the left leg by a piece of grenade shrapnel. He continued to return fire with his Bren gun until ordered to withdraw. In the evacuation, he assisted wounded onto the landing craft. He was one of only 65 from his regiment to make it back to England that day. 207 were killed, and 264 were taken prisoner. For his bravery, he received a mention in dispatch and was one of only 15 soldiers at Dieppe who the French awarded the Croix de Guerre, his with the Silver Star. So this picture is of Major Michelle Mendez's return from Afghanistan. She traveled twice to Afghanistan. She came back to a hero's welcome, but not the kind of hero's welcome we hope for our Canadian soldiers. She was an intelligence officer, considered by some as the top intelligence officer in the intelligence branch, with the potential of one day being capable of commanding her occupation. We lost her on April 23rd, 2009. She was 30 years old, serving in Kandahar, Afghanistan. So who are these two veterans? Well, the man on the left is Harvey Seaton, and he was my grandfather. Much of what I read to you was researched by my brother. When we were younger, one thing we learned rather quickly was not to ask our grandfather about the war. He was like many veterans from the World Wars. They didn't talk about their experiences and feelings from the war. They were that generation's heroes, but many of those heroes couldn't allow themselves to feel that way. It is a shame that we didn't have the opportunity to learn from them. A key message that I want today's youth to take away is to approach today's veterans and speak with them. I can tell you because I know some of those veterans, and they would be more than happy to engage with you and talk to you. Fortunately, most of today's veterans are comfortable and want to talk about their experiences. We've learned a great deal over time about talking and the importance of doing that. Now, Michelle Mendez, she was a classmate of mine from RMC. I was not one of Michelle's closest friends, but she was someone that everyone knew. Michelle could brighten up any room with her larger-than-life smile, happiness, and laughter. She had time to speak with everyone and make them feel important. Again, my message from before, war and conflict doesn't pick fairly. Tragic events happen when you are an unwelcome guest in someone else's territory. During the moment of silence, if you don't know any veterans yourself, maybe you can think of Harvey and Michelle. It would be an honor to me if you were to do so. Okay, in our last section, we're going to talk about some of the challenges that go beyond the mission. So, some striking statistics from the early wars, I suppose, certainly to my generation, the world wars that we didn't experience. There's obviously an extreme positive when you contrast the war in Afghanistan to the world wars. A significant reduction in the death and casualty rate. Despite that, it's still a very, very important part of remembrance. But there are also other consequences of combat that can be considered when you're thinking and you're reflecting during Remembrance Day. Why do we need to talk and help the public and youth contemplate what to remember? Well, my experience as a child, learning not to speak about the war, it's not something you ask your grandfather about. I couldn't understand that. Don't we celebrate heroes? If he was awarded a medal, wasn't this something he should want to talk to us about, and we celebrate? My generation had one of the last opportunities to speak and learn from our World War veterans, and I learned not to ask. I had an opportunity during school to speak to veterans, in public school and high school, because they would come to the schools and speak with us. I had an opportunity as an air cadet years ago, and I had a phenomenal opportunity at the military college when we would go to Ottawa and participate in the Remembrance Day presentations. But very rarely did we ever feel comfortable to just ask the question about what that individual's experience was. And why didn't we ask? Well, in large part, it was due to the impact of their experiences, something we're learning more and more about these days. So the long-term effects. Impact of war and combat, not just deaths and casualties. Many soldiers are afflicted by mental health concerns. For our World War vets, PTSD and other operational stress injuries were dismissed as weaknesses. We referred to them as shell shock, combat fatigue, and combat stress reaction. The increase in mental health and suicide rates amongst Canadian soldiers following the combat mission in Afghanistan has highlighted the importance of the invisible effects of combat. Mental health is a difficult topic for many, whether that be from the perspective of the afflicted who fear the stigma, or from the supportive who struggle to relate to conditions they have no personal experiences or knowledge of themselves. I'm just going to talk a little bit about PTSD and moral injury. PTSD is a fear-based response to traumatic events. A distinguishing factor of PTSD from that of its earlier psychological concepts, such as shell shock, is a shift in cause from that of internal factors. In other words, an individual is predisposed to mental illness by way of their personality or background, to external factors, such as a traumatic event, which leads to the stress. In those afflicted by PTSD, various experiences during the event become cues associated with intense fear, helplessness, or horror, and acquire the capacity to evoke strong emotional responses on subsequent occasions when the traumatic event is no longer occurring. These cues and intrusions disrupt one's ability to function regularly in day-to-day society. Moral injury, it has to do with instances where an individual's mental health is disrupted, but fear is not a logical source for that disruption. We could use an example of family members. This is a commonly used one, where family members have been known to develop PTSD-like symptoms, and that's been developed based solely on the stories that their loved ones have brought back from combat. And these mental health complications, it's difficult to understand how someone could become sufficiently fear conditioned for something that they didn't experience themselves. Moral injury acknowledges an alternative source for what creates the enduring psychological effects of warfare. The primary differentiator between the two pertains to the root motivating causes of the distress, which is morals versus fear. So the most current events that we've been witnessing from overseas, there's something that's referred to, this is still tying into the moral injury aspect, there's something that's referred to as the shattered assumptions theory. And it provides that traumatic events are those that shatter core human assumptions that the self and the world are good and meaningful. Individually, people possess and rely on an innate feeling that they are good and worthy of good things. The world is meaningful in that life makes sense, life is fair, and people get what they deserve. We all expect that and hope for that on a day-to-day basis. What's distressing about the current events are there are folks that made significant self-sacrifices, some very permanent in nature and physical, including the loss of limbs. Some have had family breakups due to their deployments, only to see the country that they fought so hard for return to the previous regime's control. This links into that whole concept of life should make sense and be fair, and that good things should result from self-sacrifice. And we realize that that's not always the case, unfortunately. Family and friends who made sacrifices can be very, very difficult to have someone that you love and care for who's made sacrifices, and then to see perhaps what they've worked so hard for unfolding in some ways. There is an inability to influence the outcome despite your efforts. Again, that can be very difficult to accept. Folks may have witnessed atrocities, developed personal relationships. I don't know if you recall, but some of the pictures that were there, in particular the one of my friend Jake who served over in Sudan. He had a picture of some of the Sudanese folks that he worked closely with. Those people lived in mud huts and didn't have much in the way of connectivity when he was serving over there. His ability to reach out, especially with today's events, what's going on in Sudan right now, his ability to reach out and find out how those acquaintances he made, how they're doing, it's almost impossible. He doesn't have an ability to contact those folks. So all he has is to wonder, what he did while he was over there. Has it made a difference? How are things working out for those folks? And finally, there can be a feeling of betrayal. We can't possibly allow the country to return to the control of a previous regime following all the effort and sacrifices that were made. What were those sacrifices for if the country returns to the previous regime's control? So during the moment of silence, we can think about all those who made sacrifices in their service, who may now be struggling with rationalizing whether their sacrifices were meaningful. You can imagine someone who may have been permanently injured. You can contemplate what aim did they make that sacrifice for. And I should not just leave this on a negative note. The positive aspect of all of this is there are positive outcomes, despite what's happening in the world today. The reason, in my opinion, that we're having the kind of discussions we are today about Afghanistan and where things are at is because of all of the sacrifices that these folks made. It did not go unnoticed, and it was not meaningless in terms of what those folks did. But I wanted to highlight the fact that for some of those that have served over there, this can be a very difficult time to be watching this in the media. So this slide is kind of an interesting one. Not sure if any particular picture there is going to jump out at anyone, but the idea here is I want to return to the parallel about COVID-19. And in much the same way, many of the freedoms that have been withheld or discouraged from us in terms of maintaining the public health situation, those are the things that folks went overseas for. That's what they're fighting for. That's what they put their life on the line for, is to protect our ability to do the things that we enjoy to do. And they didn't want to protect those things just for themselves, of course, but for future generations. And we are that future generation. So it behooves us to be able to, think back, again, during Remembrance Day, about the things that we enjoy to do. If nothing else, that's something that you can consider during the moment of silence, and be thankful for the fact that folks made some significant sacrifices in their lives, the most significant sacrifice of all, to protect our ability to continue to live our life the way we choose to do that. So I'm going to end that there. I wish, in hindsight, as I end, that I would have found a way to spool this up a little bit in terms of ending on a high note. But Remembrance Day is a bit of a solemn affair, and I really feel that it's pertinent to talk a little bit more openly and to share with all generations, what we can do during the moment of silence during Remembrance Day. And I hope that some of what I've provided will be something that you can reflect on this year and perhaps in years to come.